again. My name is Abby Sherlock, and I am one of your co hosts here for Area of Effect. And this is our production panel. So, reminder that we are still taking donations for our cause, Gamers Outreach. You can check out our link on Tiltify by typing exclamation point donate into Twitch chat. Our guests today come from a wide range of backgrounds in game production and a multitude of companies within the gaming industry. From current and past work at top AAA studios across the world, we are sitting in the presence of some pretty not producers and project managers. Let's level up and get this thing started. We have some questions on deck for our awesome panel, but we are also here for audience participation. You can ask your questions for a Q&A session to be answered at the end of the panel by typing exclamation point question in Twitch chat, which will bring up a form for you to submit your questions. Those in Discord can be on the lookout for this form and our panel announcements channel. So, to get this started, can each of you give a brief summary of who you are, what company you work for, and what is your role within production? Let's start with Patrick.
Hey everyone, my name is Patrick Benassi. I'm an associate producer over at Raven Software, where I work on Call of Duty Warzone Live Ops. I help manage the internal playtests as well as work on in development game modes.
Joel.
Yeah, I'm Joel Gifford. I work at Epic Games. I am a lead producer on Fortnite, where I produce the team that handles performance and memory across all platforms for Fortnite.
Preeti.
I'm Preeti. I'm at Riot Games. I work on Valorant, and my team makes all the skins and cosmetics and all the other cool cosmetic related stuff on Valorant.
Awesome. And Lainey.
Hello, I'm Lanny Lum. I am the executive producer on Microsoft Flight Simulator.
Awesome. So I think this is such a great panel because I think there's a lot of myths surrounding what a game producer is, because it changes based on the studio, based on so many different varieties into it. So what are some of the core responsibilities that you have as a producer? And we'll go down the panel line. Lainey.
Yeah, I think I think it really depends, like you said, on the studio that you are working at, the team you're working on. But at a high level, I think, our job is ultimately to set the team up in a place where they're able to do their job. Sometimes it's as easy as that. So giving them, the tools, the flexibility, the bandwidth to really do their best work. And, I think in terms of core responsibilities, it's important to kind of get to the place where I think one of the things I've always struggled with anywhere I've worked is being reactive versus having the time to really kind of be ahead of an issue or a plan. So I think core responsibilities kind of are setting the team up to a place where they can work and do their job while also, being able to be forward and thinking ahead.
Awesome. Preeti.
I think everything that Lanny said is true. On top of that, I think to really boil it down, it's enabling the team to make sure they're working on the right stuff at the right time, thinking about how they do that work, and also just making sure they're happy and healthy while they do it. Because it's very easy to be like, we did it, we shipped, and everyone's miserable and hates you afterwards. So, how are they doing their best work? Are they doing their best work and feeling good about it too?
Love that. Joel.
Yeah, it's getting covered pretty quick here, but it's largely like you guys have said, helping the team achieve their goals kind of on time and on budget with sanity still in the tank is the way I think of it. And then, that can boil down to a lot of things depending on the team. Building schedules, any number of tools, tracking work, triaging in Jira, all those sorts of things to help the team do that. Kind of each team might have different strengths or weaknesses or needs to achieve that. And you got to kind of adapt based on the team's capabilities.
Adaptability. Wonder if this topic will come back later. It will. Patrick.
Yeah, I think everyone's done a great job so far. I think just to add in my core responsibilities and what I think like production is alignment, making sure everyone who's working on the product is aligned, communicating realistic capabilities and timelines, and then at the same time, mental health checks, make sure everyone's like okay and not getting burnt out, while at the same time removing roadblocks. Like I'm surrounded by incredible people who do incredible work, and so if I can remove roadblocks for them so they can do that incredible work, then I'm
Mm,
being successful. So that's sort of what
Incredible. So this is a really cool question, which is how does one get projects started? How do you bring them to a successful conclusion? That's a big twofer right there, Patrick.
I think I might be a robot.
No,
No,
you're
I'm
good.
good.
I'm hearing you.
Okay, cool. So, like everyone says, it kind of depends. But for my specific role, I work on like internal playtests, right? And so the way that I get projects started is, first you gather data, you schedule stuff out, you execute it, you iterate it, and then you ship it. Um, so there's a lot of moving pieces that go into internal comms. And so just making sure everyone's aligned, making sure that we have a sort of good scoping doc before we start actually executing it. And then, like I said, iterate on things and then make sure it's made before you actually ship it out to like.
Iteration. All right, Joel.
Yeah, how do projects get started? I've seen all sorts of ways. It could be leadership, comes down and says, "Hey, we need this from this team." Suddenly, there's a project goal, business goal, whatever. This is important. Could be exactly like Patrick said. You're in a play test, and maybe designers like, "Hey, there's a gap in our systems. Maybe we need this feature or whatever to develop that." And then, in order to see it through to a successful conclusion, anyone that's worked with me knows that I love this thing called the ORP model: owner, approver, reviewer, participant. And so one of the things I really work with my teams on, yeah, Lanny's laughing because I've used that a bunch in the past, is trying to begin with the end in mind and use that model to say, hey, these are the owners and the approvers. They ultimately call the shot of whether this is successful or not. So ask those people to work together, build out the goal, kind of what they want to see at the end, and then work backwards from that through the development process your team or your studio is using to make sure that there's milestones along the way. Check in, say, yes, this is hitting our goals. No, it isn't. Do we got to rework that, make some adjustments, anything like that?
Pretty.
So I'll use a more concrete example for mine. So because my team makes skins, we make these like really big, crazy evolving skins that can be like dragons and stuff like that. It'll take us like a year and a half to actually start to end on something that big. What I do to kick it off is I grab a group of people that are super passionate about it, whether they're artists or designers or whatever. We go really big and we brainstorm like if we could do anything we wanted, what would we do? And then kind of establish that baseline and then say, all right, well, how much time do we realistically have? And like what is the right way to do this? And based on that, can we actually hit um the end goal that we've stated like by that date? Once we've aligned on what we want to do, what we think the right thing to do is we bring it to the rest of the wider team and present it to them. I think here, like documentation is really important. We do like a product kickoff deck, which is like, here's what it is, here are the key pillars, here's our audience, like, this is what we want players to feel when they experience this thing. And then with the team, we actually articulate the details of that execution. If we say something should feel like magical and you should feel powerful, like a wizard, like wielding some sort of power, okay, VFX artist, what do you think that should look like? What do you think you'd want to build in order to achieve that? And then as we actually go into production, we always go back to that deck to understand like what is the thing we're building? Is it still aligned with those goals? Like, did we go from something being magical to now it's kind of creepy? Well, looks like we're not really hitting that anymore. And then through the end, like stick to your deadline, be honest with yourself, leave enough time for QA so that you can like bug fix and optimize and whatever else, make sure you're within performance. That's it. Oh, and then of course I forgot one piece. Make sure you've actually hit those goals. See if like the KPIs that you set out at the start of like, what are we trying to achieve with this? Did you actually hit that? Measure that at the end and then do a retro.
Awesome. Lanny.
Yeah, I think everyone really covered really well the kind of how to get started, and I agree with all of that. I think bringing that to a successful conclusion, it really kind of aligns with what Preeti just said about having those goals, understanding your why. Are you actually achieving those? It's such an important part of actually bringing something to a close, because otherwise you're just spinning your wheels in the mud. You're trying to find your why. Leaves lots of room for feature creep. lots of room for just, if you're not aligned, that just disagreement, because you may be working on a really big project with multiple directors or leads, and each of them has a really big stake in it. So I think it's easy, depending on the size of your team, it's easy to get away from that. So I think it's so important for a producer to, anyone that's worked with me always knows I reference the crown. I'm Canadian. I grew up with the Commonwealth. To me, the crown is the game. So it's you do everything for the crown. You have to bring it back to that core piece.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, the next question was about aspiring producers. What kind of skills do you think they should be focusing on, whether they're in school or self-teaching? What are areas of study that would help them become a good producer? And let's go back to Lonnie.
Sure. I mean, at the core of a producer, I think the producers that I've worked with that have been the most successful are the ones that really celebrate flexibility while providing structure. Um, it's really, understanding that every team is unique. You can't really kind of force a process down a team's throat. Like you really need to understand who you're working with, how they like to work. Um, I walked onto a team recently where the lead developer was like, "I'm never going to open up Jira." Oh, okay then. Let's find a let's find a way to figure out how we're going to work together. But you have to be flexible, and I think over the years, learning how to really kind of work that muscle of being flexible has been invaluable. And I think for a producer, like absolutely, learn those hard skills, understand how to build a project, but at the end of the day, expect the plan to go out the window, and then start learning how to do things like pre-morteming before something happens. Like think about everything that could go wrong, and start to think about how you're going to react, and again, just being flexible.
T.
Uh, let's see. I think that which is one that's actually overlooked a lot is like detail orientation, and that's around like just double check, triple check everything, keep good documentation, follow up on things. Like I have a personal Trello to just track the work that I'm doing separate from the team's work because I have a lot of little things that I have to like follow up on different times. Um, Audience empathy, which is like know
Ooh,
who you're building your stuff for, whether it's players or it's like an internal team that you're building a tool for, whatever it is, but like know your audience and like understand what they need and fight for them and make sure that you're always bringing it back to like, are we serving the audience that we intended to serve in the right way? And sometimes that audience can vary, right? It's like you might say players, but which players? What kind of players? What like players today or players 2 years from now? Like players in this country or that country really varies. New players, current players, um, to that. And then these two are related, but it's stakeholder management and communication. So it's not just about communicating well and being clear in what you're saying, but who are you actually talking to and what level of detail. If you're talking to like senior leadership, that's going to vary very differently from like talking to the team. But I think strong communication, even sometimes like producers will say to me like, am I being annoying? And I'm like, no, you're not being annoying. Like I will tell you when you're being annoying. Like communication is so important, and the lack of communication is so much worse than over communication.
that is so true. Joel.
Yeah, I think those are all good points, and they kind of hit my main thought on this, which is the ability to working on the ability to work with all personality types.
Ooh.
Exactly as Lanny said, I've had lead engineers on my teams who are like, I'm going to run our Jira, I'm going to do our Jira triage and backlog and all this kind of stuff. It's like, oh, sweet. Then I can focus on these other things. And then I've had the opposite where it's like, I don't want to look at Jira. You do it all. I'll tell you the things, and here we go. And then exactly as Preeti said about the way you're communicating, because you're going to have to be the kind of glue that holds your team together and connects it to the rest of the studio, the game, whatever. So understanding your audience of how maybe this team likes to communicate in this manner, this team's more about like the game and the details and having hands-on controllers, so figuring out how you can schedule play tests because that's how they're more receptive. This team maybe wants to be involved really early because they need to make sure they've got the hooks and the capabilities into the systems you're developing, so you bring them in concept and kind of understanding how your team best interacts with all the teams across the studio.
Totally. And Patrick.
Yeah, sorry for missing the last question. I had some internet issues. But the only thing I would add that everyone else has talked about is, really want to drive home the fact that soft skills are super, super important. Being able to communicate, being a self-starter, sort of being organized and confident speaking in public, But those hard skills that we sort of talked about, like agile, PM methodologies, Jira knowledge, all of that, that can be taught, but really like lean into those soft skills because those are harder to be learned than a methodology and stuff like that. But everything else, Preeti, Lanny, and Joel said were fantastic. So.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned Jira because the next question is there any software or applications aspiring producers should make themselves familiar with? Trick? Do you hear me?
Sorry, yeah, I had to find the mute button. I'm sorry. Yeah, Jira. Jira's great. Jira's fantastic. I would also say like Excel is great. Anything that you
Mhm.
find yourself being able to organize and create processes around, any of those programs. There are so many new programs all the time. So it's really hard to like identify any of them, but I love Jira. I live in Jira. I also love Excel and Google Sheets. I live in Google Sheets and Excel to create like sort of proof of concept processes and stuff like that before I put it out to the rest of my team. So any of those, but really like also spend time learning how to format emails really well. I find myself taking a lot of notes and trying to pull out like high level ideals. But I think it was either Preeti or Lanny said like know your audience. And so like formatting in Outlook for executives is completely different than formatting for your like senior software engineer who's like, tell me everything that's going wrong with X, you know? So really just those few things.
Awesome, Joel.
Yeah, I think those are all great points, actually, especially about the knowing the audience, because to the tools you want to use depend on the audience. So it's like engineers are going to be like, send it to me in Excel or Jira, usually, where executives or maybe designers want to be like, oh, let's go over a Word document. Let's make sure that there's great references so we can talk about it in the concept meeting and stuff like that. And I think you've covered kind of the major ones to hit. I will also say, I know project gets a bad rap, but dang, can you make some sweet schedules in that if you really need a lot of dependencies and you learn that? You can also do it in Excel, but Miro, also all the rage lately. That's one of the things that I've really had to learn in the last year, especially with the pandemic.
Oh yeah, pretty.
All of the stuff that the others mentioned is great. I would add try to avoid doing stuff in email. I
Ooh.
So Valorant has been in development for a long time, and we have documents we referenced from years ago. They're all stored in Word, and oh, not Word, sorry, Google Word, whatever it's called, Docs. It's been great to be able to go back and reference that, and find those old things. Email gets wiped right after a couple years.
Yeah.
Like companies just like get rid of that stuff, and then you can't find that old email. Thank God it's like in a doc. I've actually liked Airtable. I don't
Ooh.
like a lot of the other tools like Project, and I forget the other one that I used. But yeah, I found that kind of clunky to use, but Airtable has been incredibly easy. But honestly, it depends on what your team needs. I'll never force the team to use something that they don't want to use or that they don't
Mhm.
understand how to use. I think like there's a difference between how the team intakes work. There might be different views or setups that they are more comfortable with because no tool is worth it if the team doesn't understand it or use it at all.
Yeah.
So I would say like the big thing here is like regardless of what you use, like none of
Yeah.
these things are actually difficult to use. Go into the team and assess what works for them and then learn a
Mhm.
new tool if it requires it. And even through Valorant's development, I tried many, many different tools and I figured like, okay, it's different stages. Like Excel was plenty. Now Excel just doesn't capture everything we need. So we've like evolved to like, for example, Airtable. I'm sure there'll be a point where we ditch Airtable and we try something else. So
Yeah.
just don't be a stickler for whatever tools. And yeah, some companies will say like, well, we use Jira and that's required. Cool, then you have to. But there might still be ways that you can use other tools alongside that that helps your team.
100%. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So being flexible within the constraints of what you have available. And then Lanny.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I agree with everyone else. I think the one thing I would add is that I recommend learning how to use Outlook inside and out. And I agree that you
Mhm.
don't want to keep anything in email. However, I will say you get to a point where you get so much email. And depending on the size of your team, you could get 300 or 400 emails a day, like maybe more. And so setting up really good rules, filters, and probably the most underused, and I'd say the most important feature is put a delay on your emails.
Ooh.
so that when you hit send, you have like 2 minutes to unsend it. Because I cannot tell you how many times I've sent something and I'm like, oh, I really shouldn't have said that. And then like, it's an afterthought, but sometimes it takes hitting send to really kind of click. But it's email. Yeah, it's not a great communication tool at all. Unfortunately, it's what we have in a lot of cases, or what people kind of default to. Not so much, I think, anymore with like Slack or with Teams, and having just kind of like that real time chat conversations. But I do recommend learning how to use that tool to your advantage.
Oh, 100%. I love that. This is an interesting one, kind of going back, I guess, to the soft skills. But how do you motivate teams to do their best work when working under a like strict deadline? Like we got beta, we got alpha, we got RC. You got to meet this. There's no budging. Let's go back to Lanny.
You got to give them something to believe in. I think people are going to do their best work when they have a clear vision, where they can kind of see the forest through the trees. It's you have to have a unified vision and a North Star that, I know I throw all the terms at you guys, but like it's so true. Like I feel like people will do their best work, they'll give it their all, they're passionate when they know they're building something they believe in. If you don't have that, it is so hard to keep people motivated. You can do morale events, you can get them all the swag in the world, and it maybe gives you a brief little boost, but at the end of the day, if they don't feel good about what they're building, it's really hard to turn that around.
Preeti.
Yeah, exactly what Lani said, actually. It's like having very clear goals for the team and then showing them how their work connects back to that goals is super, super critical.
Yeah.
Because, for example, like if you take a VFX artist or an animator, all they're thinking about is like, oh, I'm making an animation, but they need to understand how their piece fits into the bigger picture, and then
Mhm.
understand how the work that they did then like created value for players. And something that I'll do then, not just to show them like, hey, look, your piece is a part of that, look, it shipped, is to show them the results. So on my team, where we have like cosmetics, which like generate revenue, and like
Yeah.
player happiness, like we show them like sentiment analysis, we show them like the actual it's not like the literal raw data, right? But some variation of like the revenue data
Yeah.
to show them like this is how this thing performed. Hey, like we here, see why I didn't like let you go wild with animations or VFX or whatever in this area. It didn't, this wasn't our big bet, but on our big bet, do you see how this had so much value and how this was super
Yeah.
important? So that they actually feel like, you know, they feel like their work isn't just I made animation, it's like I made a product, and that's where like
Yes.
that's what I created. And the highest compliment that like I can pay to any of the devs isn't like, oh, you're an artist, or you're an animator, or you're a 3D modeler. It's you're a developer. And like thinking about their work as like, yeah, I know you're under a deadline. Yeah, I know you could have polished this for like 2 more weeks, but we had to cut you off. You're a developer and you made this product, and this created so much value for players.
Joel.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The kind of a lot of the places that work satisfaction comes from what I've like understood and read and everything, is autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And I think we've hit a lot of the purpose front. And one of the things I like to try and do on that front is allow someone on the team to say, hey, they're the master, they're the expert in their area. This is what the portion of it we're allowing you to do and asking you to do. What is your approach to the best way we should do that? So saying like, yeah, this is your chunk of work, whatever it is, you have the autonomy to develop the best way to do that, to figure out the way to approach it, to decide actually we should communicate it with these effects instead of what everybody thought in the initial concept meeting, because you're the effects artist, you're the expert. There you go. So like saying, yes, we need to land within this box, this time frame, this budget, whatever it is, but say you're the expert. We trust you to take it from there. Give them the kind of space to work within that and be creative within the time frame allotted.
Love that. Patrick, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Are you with me? Okay.
I
Yeah.
am. Yeah. So the only thing that I would add, I think all the answers are great so far. The only thing I would add is like, if someone finds interacting with you as valuable, you either solve problems or make their job easier, or let them be that expert, like Joel was saying. It's a lot easier to communicate and work underneath deadlines that are not only comfortable but also realistic, because they feel comfortable communicating any concerns or any blockers that they might have. So again, everything everyone else said was great. I don't manage people directly, but it is easy to find common motivational ground when you respect someone's time, you respect their process, and you respect their expertise.
Well, I'm going to turn it back to you. I know you said you didn't manage people, but this is an interesting one. I'd love to hear from people, which kind of relates to the other one when you're working with actual human beings. How do you find success working with so many different kinds of personalities on a team? Patrick.
Yeah, so I love talking to people. I love figuring people out. I think people are complex and super cool.
Mhm.
So, honestly, every sort of person is a different puzzle, and you find different motivational factors for them, and they find different value in interacting with you. So I don't know if there's an easy answer other than like I just love working with people and helping find like common ground to then um, relate to and then work together towards like a solution that makes both of our lives easier. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Common
Cool.
ground. Joel.
Yeah, I think it's a lot about the common ground that Patrick mentioned, and to meet people where they are.
Ooh.
Exactly, because you're working with so many different personality types, and you might have, the grizzled old veteran who's maybe a little jaded and gets frustrated. It's like you approach them differently, bring them different like problems, and figure out their communication styles. And then you might have the chipper young person that's just excited to be here, to hit a couple cliches on either end of the spectrum. And remembering that they're humans, and everybody's there for a reason and got into this for a reason. Like they're probably excited about it in one way or another, have this history, and you can either learn from something from them or help them learn, and that can kind of help bridge that gap and get to know them, remember they're a human, and then work successfully with
Oh yeah. Preeti.
Let's see. I think this isn't really so specifically to the different personalities as much as I think the approach that I take, which is
Mhm.
I always thought that like having to like lead a team meant like you had to be really tough and like people
Yeah.
need to be scared of me and they need to know that if they screw up, like I'm gonna yell at them a lot.
Yeah.
But I realized like kind of early on that actually like fear doesn't get results, or if maybe it does short term, but it's kindness.
Yeah.
And so, like, as much as I might find someone difficult to work with, or annoying, or just like frustrating, or they're just not listening, I like may be angry going into the conversation or frustrated. But when I actually sit down with them, like, I only have like empathy and I feel bad for them. And I'm like, what can I say to this person to make them feel good and understand? I don't want to yell at them. So yeah, just approach. I think like Joel said it well, right? Everyone's a humor. Like approach
Yeah.
them with kindness because you will get so much more, and you will feel good, and they will feel good.
Yeah.
I just want to jump in again because that's a really good point. That's like you're on the same team. You got to just
Yeah.
remember that. It can get so frustrating with deadlines and time and stress and all that stuff, but it's like
Yeah.
no, we're in the same building, we're on the same team, we're allies here. It's easy to
And
forget that.
that's a great point too, because it's like when you actually bottle it down, you're like, we want the same thing. Or if you have an artist who's like, but I want to spend 10 more years polishing this VFX. You're like, no, wait, what do you actually want? Oh, I want players to love the thing we made. So do I. Okay, so what do we need to do? We need to ship this game like next week. So stop.
Wait, I love that. Yeah.
And
Go,
the only
Patrick.
thing I'd add is that I think Joel brought up a good point and a phrase that I love: meet people where they are, meet people for who they are, work with those people to find that sort of thing that either makes them tick, but also like get them motivated about what do they want? Do they want player satisfaction, or do they want to make something cool? They want player satisfaction. So yeah.
Mm, yeah. Uh, Lanny, do you have anything to add?
I think the only thing I would add is, yeah, taking time to get to know the people in your team, but also where do they like to get information or have these conversations?
Mm,
There are some folks that I've spoken to that, are really just be direct with me, be blunt. You can even shoot me an email with bullet points, like, I don't have a lot of time for it. Yeah. And then other people are like, I really like going for walks and talking, walking and talking, and some want to be in a room. And I think, once you just kind of get to know your team and how they like to, receive good news or bad news, it put them in an environment that's going to make them comfortable and, doesn't make them feel, trapped or claustrophobic. Like just, you have to make them feel comfortable with the discussion.
Yeah. Our next question, I think, kind of builds off. We were talking about empathy and kindness and humor. But it's good for other people who are not producers to hear the answers to this question, which is what is the biggest misconception about production or producers? Let's go back to Lanny.
I'm probably going to get a lot of crap for this, but my pet peeve is when producers refer to themselves as cat herders. And I think that's like the biggest
Yeah.
misconception. It's like you're doing your job wrong if you're a cat herder. Like you should be setting them up to a place and a point where they are, somewhat self-sufficient, where they feel empowered, where they have the agency to do their job the way they want. And you're there to look ahead and unblock. But yeah, that term has always rubbed me the wrong way because I was just like, I do not want to spend my days cat herding. And I think I have so much more respect for my team than to think that they need that, that they should be treated like that. So that's one misconception.
Preeti.
Okay, I think I technically have two. I hope
Oh,
that's allowed.
go.
So one is like when you ask them like, why do you want to be a producer? And they're like, well, like I can't code, I can't design, I can't do art, can't do sounds. So I guess I'll be a producer. Terrible. Don't be a producer
Yeah.
because you can't do anything else. That's not why you want to be a producer. You should want to be a producer because the things that producers do are things that you want to solve. And that's kind of related to my second point, the second misconception, which is that we're all the same. Producers actually come in a ton of different like styles or flavors or whatever, and that's not just depending on level but also on like what is their specialty. So for me, I wanted to be a producer because I cared deeply about like what we were making and like why did we choose to make that for players, like why is that the right decision. For some people that's like, I really care about keeping the team healthy. That is the most important thing. I see these wonderful amazing developers killing themselves to hit like a deadline, and I want them to work sustainably. For other people, that's like, I just love schedules. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. For someone else, it's like, I love to be the leader in charge of like this cavalry charging into development. Like, and it could be a mix of all of those things. So be a producer because you're excited to be a producer, not because you're like, I love games and everything else is too hard for me to do. You're going to hate being a producer if that's the case.
100%. Joel.
Yeah, I really like a lot of what Preeti was saying, and it relates to my thought is I've heard from several people. It's like I want to be a chart producer because I want to be in charge. I want to make the final call. It's like it's not how it is. And exactly as you were saying, I think of a lot more as like being, to use some MMO terminology, like the tank for the team. You are a leader, but you're there to protect them, to help them, to do things. And like maybe you got to tank another team, maybe you got to tank leadership a bit to protect them a little bit so they can do the right work, stay sane, all that sort of stuff. So you're there to enable and use some League of Legends terminology, you're the support. You're like a little bit more of that kind of thing around, right? Rather than I make the call, I'm in charge, do what I say.
I want to add to that, especially because you mentioned League of Legends. Am I right? Come on. So it's like I love that when people are like, I want to make the call, and it's like, actually that sucks. Like being able
Yeah,
to
right?
make the call is like, sure, it's a privilege, but it's actually this like massive burden. And like
So
being a
much
good,
responsibility.
yeah,
Sorry.
and oh no, and like I feel like if the team messes something up or somebody like just doesn't do their work or something goes wrong or there's like a
Yeah.
terrible bug that makes it to live, like I don't go and say to like leadership like, oh, it's that artist or that engineer did it. Like it's just my fault, and like everything is just
Yeah.
ultimately my fault. And I've had a lot of interactions with people where they're like, oh, well, it's not really me, I told them to do it and they didn't do it. I'm like, I don't care if you told this person 100 times to do it and they didn't do it. They didn't do it, it's your fault, you're in trouble. So like ultimately everything is your burden. So yeah, if you're just
Yes.
like, I just want to make the decision if it should be blue or red, like get out of here. You don't want to be a producer, you probably want to do something else.
Yeah, no, you will have a ton of data as the producer, and you can make your recommendation. You're frequently asked for it. Maybe like the lead isn't quite sure, and you can put something out. Maybe based on this data, we should make this call to give them something to throw darts at, right? But frequently, it's like, nope, you got to give the best data you can, let the right person make the call, and then do everything you can to support that to make sure that was the right decision, even if you initially disagreed with it.
Exactly. And then defend it or say, here's what we learned from it. Or
Yep.
like, yeah, we messed up, but next time we'll do better. But it is absolutely just being like, with certain things, you're like, am I willing to have my ass on the line for this? Yeah, okay, I am.
Yep.
Yeah, that value judgment. Patrick.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add, I mean, I think all these answers are great, but I find when I'm explaining my role, people are like, "Oh, so you're like a project manager," and like, while it's similar, and I have nothing against PMs. I think PMs are great. It's funny because it feels like different tool sets and skill sets. I don't know if it was Preeti or Lanny who said like all producers come in different flavors. I'm not as organized as a producer as I wish I was, but what I am really good at is communicating with a wide range of people. And so because of that, I'm in a great spot where I am working with different studios who work on a shared project that I can talk to them and communicate them and elevate like concerns and risks. But if you ask me to like sit down and jigsaw together like a release schedule, that's not on me. And so we're not PMs, but I have a huge amount of respect for PMs and that sort of mentality. That's just not mine, and I'm a producer, you know.
Yeah, this is an interesting question because we're talking about, again, aspiring producers who want to get into the industry, which is a really good question because it's like, do I have a portfolio? Like, what is a game designer does? Which, how can I practice production without a game to work on? And let's go to Patrick.
Yeah, I kind of have man,
I was
I
thinking of you.
started, I have a really interesting background where I started in esports. I have a biology degree. I thought I was going to be a dentist growing up. But I worked in esports for four or 5 years, and I worked from customer support to like product management. And really what I found that set me up for most success for my job now is problem solving and owning something from start to finish. So
Mm,
like this is kind of gimmicky, but Legend of Zelda is a great example to like learn how to problem solve. You know, there are so many different solutions to a certain problem. Find one, find the lowest effort solution, or find a different solution and then learn from it that you're like, oh, I could have done that way easier if I would have thrown a bomb against this wall instead. You know, like there's so much like flexing and building that brain muscle of adaptability as well as communication that like you can get that without jumping into production. You can get that in a lot of different jobs. And so I'm very lucky that I had the opportunity to do that in esports where I was working with, you know, the legal team, the players, the production team, that I really flexed on how to not only communicate with all these different groups, but
yeah.
also problem solve with the different groups.
Yeah, Joel.
Yeah, speaking of the biology degree, I actually went to school for computer engineering because I figured I was going to be a programmer, write code, do all that stuff. But I also joined a fraternity when I was in college, and I feel like I learned more about people and how to work and do group projects and the workplace in the fraternity than I did in my classes. You know, whether that was because I was a treasurer figuring out budgets and bills and doing timelines and all that sort of stuff, or like we did philanthropy events. So like we had a blood drive in the first floor of our house where we brought, you know, campus over, the hospital was there, and we had to do schedules, planning, advertisements, all that stuff. So we were running whole projects, doing philanthropy events. And, you know, there was so much experience there, like we've talked about with personality types and all that sort of thing. So honestly, great practice options for without having game to work on is any group project, any organization project, you know, getting involved in your community if you're out of college, anything like that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Preeti.
I thought this question was going to be hard, but everyone's made it really easy because I can
Yeah.
just say what I did before I was a game producer. So I got my undergrad degree in dual in psychology, sociology, and I think psychology helped, at least with
Yeah.
like general principles around like how do people think, what motivates them, conditioning, stuff like that. And then after my undergrad degree, I got a law degree and I practiced law. And what that taught me was how to present my, I don't want to use the word argument, but like whatever I was trying to say,
Yeah.
my pitch, I guess, and how I should focus on the most important points instead of like the weak points that can just get shot down, like focus on the strongest, clearest message you can send.
Mm,
So anything that helps you kind of communicate clearly and I guess prioritize, be a leader, and that can be in any jobs. But honestly, like just get into games, like find a way. Like I know the question is like if you don't have a game to work on, if you have a group of like friends that are making a game, like go help them. Like I know people who weren't producers and are like some other like engineer or game designer or whatever artist, and they're just like my friends are making a game, they don't know what they're doing. I set up a Trello board for them. Great, you started doing something a producer does.
yeah. Oh, I love that. Yeah, and Lanny.
I mean, I think the only thing I would add, because I agree with all of that. I think it's finding those opportunities where you can, making your own games or working with friends who are making games. I think a big resource for me was also I read a ton of postmortems from other projects.
Ooh.
So it gave me a sense of what other teams went through on making open world games or first person shooter or RTS, and I think getting a sense of just what kind of challenges and what was common within those different genres that they had to face. So postmortems and then GDC Vault, like, and
Yes.
watching old videos or even just recent ones. There's so much information out there. So I think if you have like a specific question or an area, you can learn a lot from folks that have already gone through it.
And I love that because what a great saying about, you almost learn more from things that go wrong than you do things that go right.
Yeah.
People are nodding because that is something I've seen as a producer myself, where I know what not to do at least, so we can not do that again. So it narrows down your field of what you have to make happen.
My
Awesome.
boss actually, sorry, really quick. My boss says like
Yeah.
make lots of small mistakes, try to avoid the large mistakes. But either way, continue on, continue learning. Just get better, and that's all we can hope for. Then
Yeah.
that makes, I think, like that hunger for improvement is really, I mean, it's good across the board in game dev, but I think it's really good for production. Like, be okay with not knowing answers. Be okay messing up and reacting and changing your thoughts and focuses. So
That's one of my first bosses. I messed up, missed a deadline. This thing happened. We went for a walk, and he's like, "All right, so what went wrong?" And I walked through it. What'd you learn? Walk through it. You gonna make that mistake again? No. All right, then we're good here. Like, oh, all right. As long as you don't make the same mistake twice, we're good. Because you can learn so much from it.
That's
It's
Joel
a
so
good
probably
true.
lesson.
remembers something I used to say all the time, which was, I'd rather you get speeding tickets than parking tickets.
I still use that line. I love that line.
Yeah, get tickets for trying stuff and doing something new than just sitting there and doing nothing.
Okay, I love that.
absolutely.
Yeah, keeping that in the brain vault. We've moved now on to our audience panel questions, and we got quite a few. So for this section, you know how I've kind of been calling you each by name. You don't have to do that. You can just speak up if it speaks to you, if you know the answer. So this is a really interesting question, which I think is very important. But this person says, I'm noticing we have a lot of different levels of producers on this panel. I'm curious how it differs from associate to executive, and how does your responsibility as a producer change as your title changes?
I mean, I can talk from someone who just got into it. Like, I was given a specific problem or project, right? And it's like, hey, make our internal playtests better because they're bad right now. Or, sorry, that's a bad example or bad verbiage. But like, we got to change the feedback flow. So it's like a very specific target that I needed to change and fix. And I would assume as you go up, and I haven't done that yet, but as you sort of climb that sort of ladder, your scope increases, and it's all about that audience you're talking to, right? I'm solving a specific example. I would assume that seniors and leads and executives are solving bigger issues that maybe aren't like so in the weeds, but still have this sort of same mentality of like, okay, we have a problem, let's fix it and let's communicate it so that we can move forward like together. So that's like my perspective as an associate. Um, feels a lot more like zeroed in on like a problem, put a process here, make it better.
Uh, yeah, so then I guess I'll just jump through. As a lead producer, that's pretty much my experience, Patrick, because like my responsibility is this entire swath of the game, right? So I have to do a lot more of, hey, what staff do we need? What's the priority of these problems? Do we need to move somebody over to this higher, more important issue, anything like that? And then also putting kind of processes in place to report that, track that, make sure that we're able to understand what's important. So like I have a couple producers that I would hand a big problem like that, right? Like, hey, switch memory, we're in trouble here. I need you to chase this down with these two engineers. You got that? Next problem. So that's my responsibility as lead producer.
Yeah, I think it's similar for me. It's a it's just a kind of a when I look back at my career from when I was an associate producer to lead producer, like You just kind of go from a higher perspective, like the 30,000 foot view of the project. And it becomes more about making sure that your team is empowered to do their job and making sure that they have everything they need, and that the team is the work they're doing is aligned with the overarching goals of the product and the project that you're trying to ship. So I think but I also think it's important that you never get to a point where any task is beneath you. I cannot tell you how many times, even just like last week, like I'm doing something that I would have done as an AP, and that's okay, because it needs to get done and the job needs, the project needs to ship. And I will say though, as an executive producer, it is rare that I ever get to check a box that something is complete. So man, does it feel good when I'm doing a task and I can be like, done. So I kind of like having those things that I can, that are more compartmentalized or smaller in scope.
Yeah, Preeti, I know Riot also has the levels, which is kind of interesting too when you're thinking about how do I, as an aspiring kind of person, plan out my advancement?
Hmm. Yeah, we it really just depends on the project, but everything I agree with everything everyone else said here. I think something I think our art director actually said this to me. He's like, "You time travel a lot." And I was like, "That's what's killing me." I do less of that time traveling now. I have a lot of producers that work with me now, but um you're kind of like Lanny was saying, sometimes you're when I think at more junior levels, you're solving immediate problems like this is shipping tomorrow and there's a bug, or we need to finish this by in 2 weeks or whatever. We have a deadline because marketing needs to record promo materials for this thing we created. Versus like I'm being asked to project things like more than a year in the future, and I'm like,
Yeah.
exactly. I never get to check the box because I'm like, I don't know. We'll see in a year. But then a year from now, I'm not even thinking about like, yay, that thing I projected worked. I'm like thinking a year ahead of that. So it's a little I agree. There's a great deal of satisfaction in some of the simple things that I get to do. The other fun thing is like teaching those things to other people and having them take their own spin on it and learn it. One of the most rewarding things for me has been seeing some of the producers working for me doing things better than me. And I like genuinely mean that because I'm like, oh, I thought I was good at this. There's someone who's better at this. I can see them having more potential in this. And that's been like really fun too. So I think you also get to like see different, I talked about like producers coming in different shapes. You get to see
Yeah.
different producers in different shapes and help them grow and like be better at the things that they're already good at.
Awesome. This is one of basically our final question, but I think it's really, really, really important. Lanny mentioned feature creep. How do you deal with feature creep? What are you considering when you want to add scope or potentially pivot during production?
You shut it down.
Absolutely.
We have very different answers on this, but go on.
No, Joel, please.
No, I want to hear you because that is a legit answer. I just want.
Yeah, I mean, I think it all depends on the situation and what the feature creep is, and realistically, you should be able to take a tactical approach to it with how much time is there left. You should have a very clear of idea of the state of every feature that's being made, so that do we really want this? Well, what are we going to have to cut from somewhere else? Like we can't just keep adding, something has to give somewhere. But I do joke, but it does get to a point where like right at the end of shipping, I find myself just saying no a lot or pushing back and, kind of pulling. And that is the relationship it's supposed to be, right? Your creatives are supposed to be creative. Your creative director is supposed to ask for the world. And it's your job as the producer to find a way to see their vision get to where it needs to be, or, to have their ideas come to fruition, but at the same time being very realistic and, being very dropping some knowledge and reality on them.
Yeah,
I
make
love
people
that.
sometimes like just force people to make those trade-offs, right? You're like, "Oh, you want this? Like you're going to lose all of this. Are you okay with that?" And being very
Yeah.
clear about that. And then I say a lot of like, "Please don't hate me. Please don't hate me." Like cuz
Yeah, I was
yeah. Go ahead.
I
Sorry.
was I was in a Slack chat actually the other week with like creative director, and they're like, "Hey, okay, break my heart. Like, get out the dustpan. Let me know like what I can actually do, And so like what Lonnie and both Preeti said is like, be aware of like dates, deadlines, and all that stuff. And it's like, okay, this is a really great feature. This is a really great addition. But what are you gonna lose instead? Because we've already planned for top like output, or like if we are going to increase output, is this feature or thing worth hiring more people? What's the business case? And so it's like yes, shut down the stuff that you need to shut it down, but like also if something's a really good idea and is a real value add, yeah, find ways to integrate it and be okay with adapting and reacting again. Like I feel like all I do is adapt and react. I can put a plan in place and it's never going to actually come to fruition. There's going to be either speed bumps or total turns on the way. And I've seen that firsthand a lot with like game modes that we've shipped. We might have an initial vision in mind, and then it's like, actually, we found the fun if we did it this way. And so, like, reacting to that and being like, okay, all of these things that we had planned with UI and art and all that stuff, those are cut, and we're actually going to swap over to this. So,
I love
Yeah.
that.
See. Oh, sorry. I'm just gonna
Oh,
add
no,
because
it's all
we all would have ended up at the same spot because that's shut it down as the initial producer. It's like, okay, yes, that's what we need to do sometimes, but ending up to demonstrate a menu because like it's tough having to be the adult in the room when you hear somebody say, "Wouldn't it be cool if?" It's like, yes, it would be cool. That sounds awesome. Here's what you need to trade off to get that. Like, we could do that if you're willing to lose this, or we could do that if you're willing to do this and ask the team for some crunch or whatever that is. And showing those kind of feature creep options, the menu selection they can make to not just get that for free, but what they got to trade off for.
Yes. Well, we've reached the end of our panel. So before y'all go, I would love if each of you could shout out whatever you need to shout out that is on the interwebs before we leave, and we'll work our way backwards. Patrick.
yeah, I mean, if you ever want to connect with me, you want to get into game production, I've had a very interesting path from contractor into eventually jumping from esports into production. Would love to chat with anyone, so feel free to follow me on Twitter or message me on LinkedIn. I'm always down to chat. You can also hit me up on Discord. But yeah, my name's Patrick Benassi. If you Google me, you'll find me. So that's it.
Oh,
Yeah, LinkedIn's probably the best place to hit me up. Joel Gifford, you'll be able to find me. Happy to talk, give advice, learn from you, anything like that.
JD.
Yep, tweet at me. I use my Twitter for work. It's not particularly interesting because I don't tweet like hot takes and stuff often. I like tease my coworkers a little bit and tweet about Valorant. But yeah, if you have questions, message me.
Love it. And Lanny.
Yeah, LinkedIn is probably the best place. I don't know how to use Twitter. I'm just not witty. I don't know how to use many things. So when it comes to social media, so yeah, LinkedIn.
Well, let's give a big shout out to our amazing panelists. Thank you so much for being here today and raising money for Gamers Outreach.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks for
you. It was
having
fun.
me. Yeah, it was awesome.
Yay! Yeah, we talked about some awesome stuff. I also linked in chat. But big plug. I know Lanny mentioned GDC Vault. My professor Richard Lamarchian is releasing a book in October that is about production cycles. He used to work at Naughty Dog, and it's about avoiding crunch and goes over project macros and breakdowns. And I really think if you're interested in production, it would be a great resource to read. And my game is actually featured as a template for production. So I think if you want to learn, there are resources out there. And the power is with you, the power of play. But thank you so much to our panelists. And now I'm super excited to bring Jade back. I hope that was really fun. I learned quite a bit.
Yes, I definitely did too, especially like for myself with like doing with production mainly in like esports. It's really interesting to hear like that difference and the difference of like how transitioning, especially when Patrick was mentioning, and also just meeting people out there like where they're at and like
Yeah.
just being a resource. I feel like that is I learned a lot about production in terms of game development. So great Vandal once again. We're just on a roll here.
We are.
So I would like to remind chat once again, in case you didn't know, we are still taking donations for the cause Gamers Outreach, helping children be able to play games while they are dealing with hospitalizations. And you can register for awesome prizes on Tiltify by donating, as well as, using that chat command !donate or checking out the Discord and finding out more there. And I also like to thank our sponsors, Twitch Student. Twitch Student offers the means to grow an even larger audience. You can represent your university on Twitch. gain skills and experience valuable to the future in gaming. And also Geek Therapeutics, as we've seen before on the stream, the leader and the gold standard for teaching professionals, parents, students, and others about geek therapy. And we'll be going to another panel after this short commercial break.